He needs to add it in English, but I found it, I think. All right.
Excellent. Thanks.
Is it there?
Yeah, it's already.
Okay.
It already
Very good.
happened. Thanks.
Well, slides. Okay. One of the main variants and variables is how the socialist movement relates itself to capitalism, right? Um, we know that they're not trying to violently overthrow capitalism, right? Otherwise, you're in the communist spectrum. But how exactly do they think about it? You basically have three positions, right? The first one, capitalism is the preferred system. So this type of socialists don't want to end capitalism, and they prefer it over some communist alternative, right? They see the benefits of it. So this is very close to social liberalism, right? If you have this position, this is the right edge of the spectrum, where they think capitalism is good, except it has some negative effects, and we don't trust the capitalist class because they're just particularly bad people in this particular country. Therefore, we're going to have an alternative to them. And our focus is more going to be on inclusion, right? So this is about minorities. This is about making sure that nobody falls off, right? It's about having certain minimum safety net, um, so people don't become homeless, things like that, right? It's more about keeping everybody on boat and having this more human development perspective, where you try to invest in your own people, like education, higher education, things like that, right? You're just going to spend a little bit more money on investing in human capital, so to speak, than in competitiveness or stuff like that. But you are a capitalist party, just capitalist party that tries to do good. Then you have the kind of more default option where capitalism is tolerated. So what does it mean when you tolerate something? Tolerating means that you accept something that you reject, right? You accept the existence of something that you think shouldn't exist. So in that case, the socialists, they don't like capitalism. They just know that they, in the near future, are not going to get out of it, or they don't have a good plan to do so, or they, like, if there would be a great alternative, they would take it. They just don't see it. So it's going to be a more defensive stance, right? You're going to defend against capitalism. The focus here is more fighting injustice, right? Higher wages, pushing back on whatever the capitalist class does, and then fighting inequality, trying to tax them as much as possible because we get more money back for the working class, trying to solve all these problems that come from it. So you chiefly see capitalism as the problem, but you're trying to solve the problems rather than get rid of the system, because you think that in your practical context, that's the best thing to do. And then you have a third variant. This is the type of socialists, the evolutionary socialists, who see capitalism as a transitional phase. So they say we're in capitalism right now because that's the flow of history, but we will get out of it at some point, right? This is just the current phase of history in this long dialectic. But we want to push back capitalism, right? We want to establish a fully socialist or some type of communist society. So we're going to actively push back the private sector, right? We're trying to take a mixed economy where this government takes a big part of the economy, where they try to break the power of capital by taking away all the most profitable things from them, or where they try to encourage cooperatives, right? This citizen-owned thing that we discussed. And you basically try to reduce the share of the pie of private sector, right? Part of it owned by workers, part of it owned by the state, and then you have some things left for the capitalist class. But you're trying to change the structure of the economy away from a capitalist-dominated economy, and you try to build alternatives to that, right? You start pushing cooperatives, etc., etc. You set up different structures that should lead you away from that when the time is right. So this is a type of socialism that actually tries to change capitalism away from that. All of them are socialists, right? The preferred one is the end of the spectrum, that if you go further, you enter social liberalism. The transition one is the one, if you go further down that road, you get towards communism. It's like a bus ride. There's different stops you can get off, right? The vast majority are in the tolerated, or preferred part of the spectrum in the world, right? So if you, I did the hopeless exercise of trying to plot that on a line for Latin leaders. I took some of the more known ones, right? This is not political science. This is me late up at night trying to finish a lecture. So if you have a different opinion on this, please tell me, right? But if you look a bit at the spectrum in Latin America, so you have some people on the limited reform side, but they're not famous. I'm not mentioning them. Our president, AMLO, right? I would qualify as a socialist. He's kind of in between the preferred and tolerated zone, where he doesn't challenge capitalism. He particularly hates certain capitalists, and they hate him, and so you have this war between them. But they're not trying to make a revolution, right? At least not right now, right? As I said, it depends on level of realization. You need to be very careful if you want to be a socialist in North America, starting by not calling yourself a socialist, right? So you have people like AMLO there who want to reform the country, to do away with certain injustices, who basically push back neoliberalism. And Lula in Brazil is kind of the same project, right? Your objective is to reduce poverty, but not fundamentally change the economy. You're trying to change the state rather than the economy. Trying to change the public policies. You have Bernie Sanders, who's slightly to the left of this, through the American representative. The only reason he's to the left of AMLO is because he's more socialist when it comes to redistribution. Sanders seeks more direct redistribution, higher taxes on the rich, wealth taxes, tax on I froze. Tax on Wall Street, these kind of things. In terms of public policies, a lot of things that Sanders wants, we already have, like more public universities, like cheap education in public universities, like universal healthcare. Like US doesn't have something like the IMSS. So he's not that radical, but he is to the left of us on redistribution. Then in the middle, there's someone like Evo Morales. He would be your standard socialist, who also has a socialist party. That's the name of his party, Movimiento de Defensa del Socialismo, or MAS. Seeks reform, seeks to expand the state, but is not necessarily challenging property relations, or challenging his own capitalist class. He's just trying to grow the state by nationalizing things, etc. And then we get into the real left, of the more transitional leaders. You have Ortega in Nicaragua, more Marxist tradition, is in this active fight with capitalist class, which now and then becomes military, right? You have people like Hugo Chavez, made an actual attempt to transition the economy away by nationalizing big parts of it, by encouraging cooperatives, by actually on an economical level challenging the capitalist class. Never eliminated it, right? But he went there. And then you have Allende of Chile, the guy who got killed by neoliberals. He is actually he was trying to do this Marxist thing where you slowly move away from it. You highly raise the wages. You give a lot of power to the working class. But well, that was dangerous, so he got killed. What do you think of this? Or would you place him differently?
I just will like move AMLO to more to the right, if I'm honest.
Why?
And also Sanders, Bernie Sanders, right?
Why?
Because I don't feel and I don't see that AMLO is that like he's pretty like is low and very specific on which politics and laws he's going to apply and reform.
Hmm.
Like so that's why like I don't I don't know if it's like because he's like in some character, like he's trying to do some stuff, but in a very cautious way, so he don't get like uh punished or something for trying to do good things that may be considered as socialist. So that's why I will put it in the most like right.
Hmm.
That's why.
Okay, okay.
Because like even if he's doing like good things in some areas, I still feeling like it's kind of slow and not like so radical. He's just like he's walking like a turtle, you know.
That's, huh. I understand what you're saying. Slow would really not be the word. I think change has been very rapid. He established, he basically built a welfare state in 1 year. Just to comparison, in Europe, the same things AMLO did would take 40 years to do. Um, that's kind of what Europe, they were very slow, raising wages, etc. But okay, I understand maybe in Latin context, you have a bit more radical people here. Maybe it's my European frame of mind that I see this as excessively fast. But okay, we have different expectations. Okay, good. My next essay is about this, Miss Sophia, if you're interested. Why Morena is still the real left. That's the title of it. This is me versus everyone. I want to have this giant fight
Uh,
with the world.
Doctor, I have a question.
Yes.
Are you going to resolve in your essay that you think Morena is actually the left that Mexico deserves? Because I have like this is kind of far away of the class, but like one of the things that I really get angry about Morena is that when they do some like I'm not so sure if they are actually the kind of leftish party that Mexico needs. But I also aware that all the media is like trying to disqualificate them. So it's kind of hard for me to had an actual opinion. So what do you think?
What you say is extremely vague, right? It could be about anything. I think we should talk about this maybe after the lecture or whenever you have
Okay,
time.
excellent.
My line of argument is that it's the only party we can have. The most important thing is that they won, which no other left faction even got close to ever, um, except AMLO in the past when he was in a different party, right? But my main argument is that it's fundamentalorian. This is the way. Like if it's gonna be done, this is how it's gonna be done. There would is the line of my argument, and that they are more working class than non-working class people understand. That's another thing I'll try to explain. But anyway, that's for later. Maybe it fails. Maybe I never finish the essay. Um, maybe I'll be thinking of you. I'll say, can't do this, and I write about something else. Um, okay, back to the class. So what else do you have variance on? One thing that I think you'll find in no textbook that I wanted to talk about with you is is about the appearance of socialism. Socialism is two-faced fundamentally, but not in a bad way. Not like one way is lying, one face is lying, and the other is telling the truth. It's two-faced in the sense that it has this duality in it, where on the one hand, it is highly technical. Socialism is a technical ideology. It's about coming up with detailed plans to deal with detailed problems, with a lot of math and a lot of Excel tables, and then how this is going to work out, right? On the other hand, it's a mass working class movement, right? So it has both a technical and a populist face, and they're both there at all times. Each socialist movement is technical, and each socialist movement has a populist side to it, but it can only show one face at the same time. So socialism will appear under two different, let's say, well, appearances. One is the technical one. This is the socialist as the manager, as the very smart guy who understands how to do things, as the academic, as people like me. Well, I'm not very smart, but I am an academic. People like me who use social science basically to solve social problems, right? It's the social science approach, the sociological, the economical approach to socialism. And thus you have a kind of academically led movement, or the face of it is an academic, like in Bolivia right now. Arce is an economist professor. He's not a very populist guy. He's a technician. These movements will also typically be a bit more progressive because they're a bit more culturally elite, or the face of it will be, well, higher education people. The other face of socialism is the populist phase, right? This is when your front guy focuses all in his connection with the people, connection with the working class, by speaking in a language that entices the working class, that is not technical, on purpose, right? You saw this with AMLO. People, oh, AMLO's vague, he doesn't have a plan. He had a plan. He had a plan all along. And as soon as he got into office, you saw what the plan was. But he talked about it in a simple way, because he knew there was no point in comparing to other countries and in Sweden this and whatever. So people are not going to get it. So he just says, oh, we're going to give more money to, I know, kids in school, etc. So you have a more antagonistic discourse. You talk about la mafia de poder. You talk about the elite. You know, populist stuff. And most important for populism, you stay very close to what people want and how people want it and how they talk about it. You don't do mansplaining, let's say, on a giant scale. You don't say, oh, well, what you really want is this, right? It's more of a academic thing to do, right? Like, you're angry at immigrants, but you're really angry at this. No. Typically, this will be less progressive because you stay close to what people want. People are never as progressive as cultural elites. And this can, again, this is the same party, right? It just depends on who the face is. So within Morena, this is Ebrar versus AMLO, right? Ebrar is this very sophisticated culture dude. AMLO is the guy who still eats breakfast in Oxo, even if he's the president. They're very different people that play their cards different, but they're the same party. And you have that almost everywhere. I personally am strongly in favor of the populist way, although I belong to the other one. I think that's the way forward in elections. But anyway, you have these two faces, but they're not actually different, they just look different. And then a last variable that you can have big difference between socialist parties on is relation to democracy, right? Democratic socialism is usually democratic because it has this focus on the majority, right? It is very majoritarian ideology. And in that sense, it is almost always democratic, at least democratic in the simple sense of majority rule. We are indoctrinated to think of democracy as something different, right? Democracy is about minority rights, and it's about checks and balances and the courts and the INE and all that stuff. It's kind of far away from the Greek sense of the word. But in the original sense of the word, socialists are almost always democratic, in the sense they seek to please the majority, seek the support of the majority. That's the plan. they don't have money. There's no scheming way to do this. You need to go via the masses. Yet in practice, you can find different examples, right? For two reasons. One is that a movement that starts democratically can still get corrupted, right? Could still become more repressive. Venezuela is a good example of this. Chavez won elections 3 times with absolute majorities, making him one of the most popular leaders ever in history. Maduro also won his first election. Then his last election, he had major beef with the opposition, and his government is corrupted and whatever, right? And that is less democratic in that sense. And no, the elections didn't have the main opposition, and he's at war with this other guy, Juan. So it can evolve in that direction. Nicaragua, roughly same, more repressive against opposition. But they're still democracies in the sense that they didn't abolish voting, right? That can happen. You could also have, there's still democratic socialists, just corrupt democratic socialists. You can also have non-democratic socialism. That is rare. The main example of this would be China, which you could also call communism, right? But if you see them, you could see them as socialists in the sense that they have a market economy where the government just have a very heavy hand in redistributing the money, right? And in providing services. And they're not democratic. But usually if you go down that route, that's why I don't really call China socialist. That usually comes with the loss of many other values and principles, and you kind of drift away from your original plan. So you still in practice have some variants of that, although the bulk of socialist movements are democratic. Now, what do they have in common? I've talked about this before, right? And we're going to have other lectures on the policies. I just want to point at 3 things that I think help us separate socialism from communism and from liberalism. That's going to be my main focus here. So one thing I want to talk about more is state intervention. It's obvious, socialists like the state. If you are against the state, it's very hard to be a socialist. Because how are you going to do things? You won't. So the main plan is to deal with problems by making the state deal with them, right? And that puts them in sharp contrast to neoliberalism. That's why they're opposites here. One way of doing that is that socialists typically will support the expansion of the state in the economy. They think that certain sectors of the economy should be at the bare minimum regulated by the government, but usually organized by the government. And how socialist you are depends on how much you include in this, right? So at the kind of minimum case, it would include water, electricity, education, healthcare. Then more expanded, you could say transport, communication. If you want to expand further, you could talk about certain resources, right? Oil, lithium, with Morena. These type of things, like how far do you want to go in expanding this? If you don't own it, the second best thing socialists will try to do is to regulate it. So we can't control it, but we're going to make laws about how you, private sector, are going to do this, so you don't kill people. Now, it's important to delineate here the difference with communism. The objective is not to end private property, right? In communism, the government takes everything because they want to eliminate the capitalist class and then give it back to the workers one day. But that's the plan. The objective is to end private property. So you don't nationalize things on a strategic basis. It's not like, oh, we need to nationalize because we need that particular thing. We nationalize it because we want to, because of class warfare. You go against the capitalists. In socialism, that's not the point of nationalizing things. It's not to annoy the capitalist class. It's because you don't trust them. It's to guarantee the service because you don't think the market will do it right. It's to You do it because you want certain outcomes to happen. You want people to go to school. You want healthcare to be available. That's the reason why you do it, not to abolish private property, right? So it stems from the idea that the market just doesn't do it right, that we can't trust them with it, that if you would liberalize electricity, like in Texas, people's bill will suddenly go up 500%, right? If the market shifts. You don't trust it, so you want to have the public sector have a hand in it. Just so you understand there's a different logic behind it. Even if they do the same thing as communists, is not the same intention. Also, in terms of a resource, if you talk about oil, for example, this is more about having control over it, right? So that the people, via the state, have control, that they can keep the benefits of this particular resource and that it doesn't get bought up by some foreign company. So that's about state intervention in the economy. Any questions about this before I move forward? Diego, Hugo, Valeria.
Could you explain it?
Valeria, Mariana, sorry.
Could you explain it again? I just want it to be more clear.
What part?
About the main difference about privatizing.
Well, communists will expand the government in the economy because they want to change basic economic relationships. They want the capitalist class out and they want the people to own production, right? Mainly with the objective of stopping exploitation. So you don't work anymore for the capitalists. That's the goal. With socialists, you try to push back the market mainly so you can guarantee the products to people. So it's mainly about supply to the people of their rights, right? You want to get rid of healthcare. Sorry, you want not to get rid of healthcare. You want to have public healthcare, not to end the exploitation of nurses. You want to have public healthcare so people could have healthcare, right? So it's not from a class warfare perspective, it's from a service perspective that you will nationalize things, because you think the government needs to do that. So it is more, in socialism, it's more focused on strategic areas, where in communism, that's not the point. The point is it's any area, it's normal shops too, it's whatever, right? If you understand what I'm saying? Now, it can have the same effect. For example, if this government builds stuff and they contracted by the state, those workers are gonna, I think they earn 15,000 pesos a month. People who work on like Dos Bocas, etc. That's a very high wage for a construction worker, right? So it does, at the same time, it pushes back exploitation, but that's not the main reason they do it. In other words, don't be scared. They're not coming for your father's money, right? Or are they? They're kind of. But we'll get to that later.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, like, the main goal is not to end exploitation, right? Like, just to be clear. Or like,
the
it's
main
like
goal
a side
of
effect.
this is not to end exploitation. Okay. Socialists will resist exploitation. But the goal is not to end private property and to end the system.
Yeah, okay.
At least not via this.
Yeah, it's like a side effect, but
Yes.
not like the goal. Okay. Thanks.
The goal is that people have their rights. The other common theme in socialism, which is a kind of a hidden one, but I think is a really important one, and one that really separates it from other ideologies, is the responsibility for outcomes. Socialists are characterized by, if there's any character trait of a socialist, is that they feel responsible for things in society. More so than, I would say, more so than communists even. They feel responsible for what actually happens tomorrow. So socialism is, I'll get back to that, but socialism is a kind of maternal ideology. I know it's a weird concept, but you can see difference between more masculine, aggressive communism. Socialism is maternal in the sense that it's service-oriented, it's protective, it's caring, right? It's politics. That rarely, if these very macho people, it's the energy of it, the focus of it is towards public service, right? It's towards helping society with things. It's towards protecting citizens, and it's towards caring for what happens in their life. We're going to get to the policies well, the practical policies later, but the big difference here, because you could see the same with social liberalism, right? They also care about people, but liberals care for opportunity, not for outcomes, right? They want people to have a chance to make it. They don't want people to actually make it, or at least they don't take responsibility for the outcome of that, right? So, for example, to show you the difference, I'll give you two examples. Well, first one, if you look at education, the social liberal idea would be to have scholarships for very talented students, right? And if they're good, then they'll make it. Socialists will say, well, yeah, okay, but that's not going to change the big picture, right? So the socialist variant would be, AMLO does, to give scholarship to all poor kids, to give people money to go to school, literally, just cash. Here, you take responsibility more for outcomes, because you want them to go to school, and you don't get the money if you don't go to school. So the result of the policy is people go to school, right? It's outcome oriented, not opportunity oriented. So socialists will actually try to engineer what happens in society. Because the goal of it is not to justify capitalism, right? As in social liberalism. The goal of it is not to make it fair, not to be concerned with how fair the game is. The goal is to reduce the problems of capitalism. Not to justify it, not to make say, oh, now it's fair. No, that's not the point. It's about what happens. It's about welfare, right? So that it comes from a kind of maternal concern with individuals, with solidarity with individuals. In socialist ideas that you don't stand alone. You have a problem, and if it's a problem that other people have too, then we should solve it together, right? Healthcare, we all have this problem. We should all solve together. Public transport, we should solve it together. If you have a problem, then we together should take care of that. Because socialists, they don't think that everybody's fully responsible for their fate, right? They understand that different circumstances influence that. They understand that it's unfair to give people the same opportunity if somebody has so much more resources to make use of that opportunity, or if someone else just comes from a particularly bad background, right? They're not the same. The same thing is not going to happen to you. It's not the same if your parents cannot pay for food and you need to start working at early age. It's not the same. Oh yeah, you had the opportunity to go to school, but that doesn't guarantee you go, right? So socialists kind of have a more statistical view of reality. When they look at the situation, they look at, okay, what's probable to happen? It is probable that if we do this, or that in this situation, people are going to act like this. And since I know that that's going to happen, since I know it's probably you're going to do something stupid, I'm going to try to stop you from that. It's my responsibility because I see what's happening, right? And you don't. Like if you're a drug addict, you don't know what you're doing. I do know what you're doing, so I'm going to take care of you. It now becomes my responsibility because I'm the adult, I'm the mom, right? Just like if you see a kid run into the highway, it's not your kid, but you're the only person that saw it, it's kind of your responsibility to go after that kid, right? Socialists have that logic of responsibility. They'll take responsibility for things that they don't do, even for bad people. You see this with AMLO and how he helped the fuel thieves. Remember, early in his government, there's this giant explosion a lot of people died trying to steal oil on a pipeline. And he paid for the funeral of those people, and everyone was angry. But this is a socialist thing. You say, well, they're poor and they did this, and I can help them, so I need to do this. One effect of this is that socialism will be much more direct than other ideologies. And this is, I would say, a selling point of it. Socialists, more than conservatives or liberals or nationalists, try to actually solve the problem by doing policies that will have a very predictable impact on it. If you look at the tree growing program, for example, right? In a liberal regime, you would do something, you would either do like a tax break on trees, so more people plant trees, or you would have a subsidy program that if farmers want to plant trees, they could get fertilizer for that, or they could get money for that, or tax breaks, right? But that's not outcome oriented, right? That doesn't guarantee more trees. It creates the opportunity for more trees. It creates an incentive. While the socialist government, in our case, says, yeah, look, we know again that poor farmers are not going to plant trees because trees take 4 years before they bear fruit. You're long dead of hunger by that time if you're a poor farmer, right? So this is just not going to happen. This outcome is implausible to happen. So we're going to give them the trees. The government is going to grow trees and give them to them, and we're going to pay them until they plant the trees, like until the trees bear fruit. That results in 420,000 jobs and 600, you think I'm going to say 1,000, right? Million trees been planted so far in this program. It's an important fact. It doesn't get stressed enough. 600 million trees they planted. That's a direct policy, right? You want more trees, we're going to plant them. Bah. By the way, I'm sidetracking anyway. 600 million trees. Tren Maya cost 11,000 plants. There's an interesting balance between the two. So that's direct policy, right? Same with healthcare. We're not going to give people the opportunity to go to health. No, we're going to have free healthcare. That's the idea here. So, and this makes an interesting contrast with communism. Both are working class ideologies, but socialists are a bit more, take more responsibility for tomorrow, let's say, for the direct improvement of conditions working class. Communists play the long game, right? They want to change everything, and that will come at a cost. Well, socialists often don't dare in a way to take that risk. They're much more concerned with making sure baby has food tomorrow than change the whole system. And that's kind of an ethical fight between the two, right? Where one says, no, but you're never really solving the problem. The other says, yeah, but you're being irresponsible because you're not helping people today. That's kind of the discussion between these two ideologies regarding who is more working class there. Any questions on that before we move on? No?
Sounds like socialism doesn't take like risks. So if there's a problem, they fix it, and that's it. Like they do not create the conditions. It's like more or less the point.
Now they take some risks, of course. Any policy has a risk, but they're not going to kill the hostage, let's say. They're not. Well, the communists would sometimes take the sacrifice to get to a better place tomorrow. And then I understand both ethics, right? They just come from different movements, and then people's estimates of what's gonna work. And it's kind of eternal debate between the two. Then lastly, a very common socialist theme is redistribution, right? You already knew this, but let's look at it again from an ideological perspective. So socialism, as part of the definition of it, seeks the redistribution of resources, right? And chances too, and opportunities too, because some people are given more than others. So how does it do that? Well, basically by taxing. The idea is that you redistribute wealth via progressive taxation, which again is a socialist thing. In communism, you don't have taxes. I think nobody ever mentioned that in your life, but in communist societies, there are no income taxes. You don't need taxes if the government already owns everything, right? You just, whatever you sell goes to them. But in socialism, you have taxes. Progressive taxes mean that the rich pay more. And neoliberals will be for a flat tax where everybody pays the same. They make it sound very slick, like, oh, but it's the same for everyone. Of course, that's not what you want. So progressive taxation, that will then be used to either give money back directly via, I don't know, income support for working mothers like we have, or for pensions or whatever, or it will be used to redistribute opportunities, right? To invest in poor regions, to help ex-criminals, like to do social work. You use that money, you spend it on helping people and thereby creating new opportunities. Which of course makes socialists the natural enemy of the elite because they're after their money, right? As Bernie Sanders says, he's once again there asking your financial support, once again. Now it's important to understand on a philosophical level why. You understand this on a practical level, right? You need money to pay for this. But what's the justification behind it? Part of it is a needs-based justification, as in Jeff Bezos doesn't need more money, right? He already has everything, while poor kids do need breakfast. So that's a needs-based justification. But the other one is a Marxist justification. It's also a matter of justice, not just doing the right thing. It's a matter of justice because the wealth of the rich people, from Marx's perspective, comes from the workers, right? It's the workers who create the wealth. We went over this already. So since the working class suffers exploitation, taxes is a way to get that back, right? The Robin Hood's argument here. Capitalists got rich off the back of poor people. Now we're going to take part of that and give it back, and turn it into something useful. So here, from a socialist perspective, like a orthodox perspective, the rich people never had the money in the first place that we're taxing them for, right? It's society's money because society created the wealth. We're just taking it back. So the SAT is like a heroic institution in a way from a socialist perspective, because people see them as taking your money, but really they're taking back your money, right, and giving it to you if you're not rich, by paying, for example, for your university. This is a very suppressed frame in North America, right? This way of thinking, you never hear this. This is logic. But that's the justification behind it. And that's their way of dealing with exploitation. And also redistribution of power directly in the workplace by trying to give more power to the working class. How do you do that? By supporting syndicates, by supporting trade unions, so people can unify and stand up to their company. Socialists will try to help syndicates when they can, by either giving political support, moral support, by working with them, sometimes financial support. Depends a bit on how your state works and what's possible within that structure. But typically, the history of socialism is the history of trade unions, is the history of syndical movement, because it's not just politics. This fight also happens in the street and happens especially in your workplace, right? That's where the real fight against the capitalist class is, much more so than politics. So they, not much more, but equally so. So they try to push that, and then work closely with syndicates if they can. And if they don't, we'll get to that next week. We talk about, after that, we talk about like the right wing. So when they don't, they usually
Oigan, solo a mí se me trabó.
A mí también.
Ah, sí, yo tampoco lo escucho.
Le iba a mandar un mensaje, pero pues si se le fue el internet no lo va a leer, ¿verdad?
Oh, la mafia del poder otra vez.
Es el Prian cuando se enteró que va a subir un ensayo a favor de Morena. Es eso.
Sí,
Bueno, lo único que hacer es para hablar de
Ay, Hugo, no te escuché. Te escuchaste muy lejos, lo siento. ¿Puedes decirlo otra vez?
fueron los únicos papeles para hablar de socialismo.
Ay, no, no entendí nada, lo siento. Oigan, ahí antes de, o sea, cuando empezaron la clase de que estaban hablando, porque entré tarde, o no dijo nada
eh,
como sorprendente.
entre comunismo y socialismo, de que estaban juntas y que las dos ideologías son de Marx, pero con el tiempo se fueron dividiendo. O sea, el comunismo estaba más enfocado a la utopía, más o menos,
Ujú.
y el socialismo sí cree en el Estado y en la transición y todo ese rollo.
Ah,
O sea,
bueno.
uno es revolución y el otro es evolución.
Oh,
Así lo planteó Sutura en una diapositiva.
excelente.
Como que a las diapositivas, todas las presentaciones las subió
La
ahí
sube.
en el
Ah, ya
canal.
están, o sea, ya están todas, todas, todas.
Sí, las subió desde que inició el semestre.
Ah, excelente.
Sí,
Sí,
te pido que
porque,
estés más atenta, por favor.
ay, ¿amaneciste de malas o qué?
Pues me acordé del Prián y me puse de malas.
Me acordé de mis candidatos y me puse de malas. Imagino que evolución es el socialismo, ¿verdad?
No, hacia... no sé qué iba a decir.
O sea, y además pésimo comediante.
Oye, Diego y Mariana, ¿no han ido... ya no han ido a algo del futuro?
No, yo les, o sea, te mandaron forms de qué es lo que quieres hacer, ¿no? Y luego no me metieron en ningún grupo. Y luego les hablé directamente y me dijeron, ah, sí, ya la próxima semana empezamos. Y no me volvieron a hablar. Y yo, ay, no, dije, ya qué pena.
Ok. ¿Y tú, Diego, te pensabas meter
Yo fui
con
a,
Mariana?
yo fui al primer día de brigada, pero ahorita estoy trabajando y ya,
Ya, está
o sea,
difícil.
ya no tengo tiempo. Pero ahí, o sea, trato de compartir como quiera información así.
Sí, qué bueno.
Sí, pero yo sí a ti te he visto de más, o sea, muy activo, la verdad. O sea, vas muy bien.
Me estoy muriendo de estrés. Oye, pero como que ya luego, pues ya saliendo de vacaciones, ya ahí pues le puedes meter más.
Sí, o sea, de que en vacaciones, allá, pues cuando acabe los últimos del semestre y cuando acabe ya, todavía quedará como que 2, 3 semanas muy
Dos
buenas.
semanas y pues iban a ser las más pesadas.
Sí.
Oye, Sofía, ¿a ti cómo te ha ido con las entrevistas? Platícanos a qué candidatos, para qué puesto.
Pues fíjate que me ha ido bien, la verdad. Pues últimamente nomás a los candidatos a la alcaldía a la presidencia de una de las redes sociales progresistas, que es el, o sea, definitivamente no va a ganar, la neta. O sea, siento que los partidos que no son, al menos aquí en Coahuila, o sea, que no eres ni PRI, ni PAN, ni Morena, o sea, los demás únicamente son gastadera de dinero. O sea, porque al final de cuentas son partidos que no buscan ocupar un cargo, únicamente ocupan tener como el 3% para seguir como existiendo. Entonces, pues sí, entrevisté a ese hombre y entrevisté a Marcelo Cofiño.
A Marcelo Ebrard.
Sí, me senté ahí en el avión con él y platicamos. Ya me puso la vacuna, de hecho. No. Ay, oigan, yo tengo una teoría. A ustedes, es que, o sea, aquí en Torreón, voy a empezar como súper tía conspirativa, pero aquí en Torreón pues ya están vacunando, ¿no? Pero hay como unas 40,000 vacunas o 5,000 que, o sea, no sabemos dónde están. O sea, ya empezaron a vacunar a los maestros y hay personal médico que todavía no ha sido pues vacunado. Pero a ustedes no se les hace que a lo mejor vacunaron de que a los candidatos o algo así, de que de los partiditos más fregoncitos. O sea, porque yo los veo o sea, como que se me hace raro que tienen una campaña que sigue siendo pues demasiado cercana a la gente, pero pues siguen estando súper expuestos a contagiarse. Entonces como que a veces me agarra o sea, o no les importa, o hay algo que está sucediendo y no lo sé. Se escucha súper tía, pero no sé. Tengo esa teoría súper horrible.
Yo creo que sí, o sea, si tienen acceso de alguna manera, sí podrían vacunarse, pero ¿dices de todos los partidos o nada más de Morena?
No, o sea, nomás de que PRI, PAN, Morena, o sea, los partidos más dominantes, con mayor influencia.
No, yo no te la compro. O al menos aquí no,
¿No?
a menos que hayan ido a Estados Unidos.
Bueno, eso sí. Sí, o sea, por ejemplo, yo que los he entrevistado, o sea, se me acercan, pero de que demasiado. Y es como que, bro, o sea, estás todo el día en la calle y no sabes si traes el bicho. O sea, o, no, o a lo mejor les vale, no sé. Pero bueno, como sea. Gracias por escuchar mi teoría de tías.
Es que sí, o sea, están bien súper seguros y con cuánta gente no hablan al día, o sea, cientos. O sea, y
Sí.
están como si nada. Yo creo que si están tan seguros es por algo.
Bueno, lo que yo sí sé, Sofía, es que, por ejemplo, aquí a los de un candidato a diputado le hacen pruebas semanales de que a su equipo.
Ah, se hacen pruebas semanales. Mira, eso no sabía. No lo había contemplado.
Oye, Diego, ¿y tú estuviste cuando fue lo de Claudia Caballero? Lo de déjame escucharte. O sea,
No, yo no estaba ese día, fue un viernes y había una junta vecinal, entonces en la Florida, entonces todos estaban en la junta vecinal, entonces nada más, pues Roberto manda a la suplente y al coordinador de campaña, y ya sucede eso, ¿verdad? Pero sí, yo no estaba ese día, hasta el día siguiente ya fui. Pude haber estado, pero seguramente tenía tarea o algo.
Oigan, ¿creen que Tour vuelva? No, ¿verdad? Ni de chiste.
Yo digo que nadie se tardó mucho.
yo
Sí,
también digo que
Pues igual solo faltaba una diapositiva.
sí. Sí, pues hay que dejarle un mensajillo.
Pero
bueno,
ahorita
pues
va
nos
hasta las
movemos a
diez
la clase de
veinte.
sociedad.
¿Cómo digo? ¿Qué sociedad? ¿Qué cosa?
Que nos movemos a la clase de sociedad ya. Bueno, va a empezar hasta las 11, ¿no? Siempre empieza a las 11.
Sí. Oigan, ¿vieron algo? Bueno, sé que Diego, tú expusiste nomás, ¿verdad?
Sí,
Ah.
sí, nomás. Y también hablamos sobre lo de la legalización de la marihuana. Pero,
Saquen el toque.
pero fuera de ahí, todo normal. Y dijo que tú y Hugo exponen el otro lunes.
Ah, muy bien.
Entonces, ¿creen que entonces ahora sí, ese día sí vamos a entrar de que a las 7 o así?
Ah, no creo.
No.
O sea, ¿cuánto que nomás va a presentar Diego, no, Hugo? Y luego yo voy a presentar hasta el jueves. Ay, no.
O puede que cancele de clase, no sé. O sea, esta semana tuvimos las 2 clases. Entonces ya, como que break.
Sí, ¿verdad? Ya fue mucho.
Ay, no.
Que
Es que se
cancele el
pone bien
semestre.
nefasta esas clases.
Sí.
Y la de
Y
ética
luego,
también.
ay, la ética me da mucho coraje porque es ética y políticas públicas. Y no sé, tenía como que tanta esperanza de esa clase.
Sí, yo
Ah,
también. Sí, esperaba más, la verdad.
sí. Literal, ahorita, o sea, nada más siento que la clase de tour y la de teoría de democracia es como que lo que mantiene. Estoy como que no, no puede ser.
Lo que me mantiene en la carrera.
Ay, no, y luego ayer el maestro que nos dio el nombre de la materia, que preguntó, ¿qué materia es esta? Y yo, oh my God.
Bien confundido.
Ay, sí.
Ay, Víctor. Doctor Víctor Néstor.
Oye, la de derecho tampoco se queda atrás, o sea, yo también esperaba mucho y ese a la milla nomás no.
Sí. Pero es que, ¿sabes qué? Yo también siento que, o sea, el tradicional no es por sangrona, pero exponen muy feo. Digo, yo sé que yo no soy la mejor exponiendo, pero, o sea, siento que ellos nomás, o sea, como que nomás lo leen y luego es demasiado texto, mucho texto.
Sí, luego ponen
Sí.
fotos como que de inicios del 2000, todas pixeleadas, la letra bien chiquita, cosas bien raras.
Bien cursiado.
Por ejemplo, ahí presento en sociedad y les cambié el diseño.
Qué bueno, entonces
Se va a
vamos a
notar la
hablar de
diferencia, vas a
bonito.
ver.
Sí.
Además, en comparación a las exposiciones que teníamos en primer semestre, o sea, yo me acuerdo que veía los equipos y de que toda la presentación en Canva, con efectos, o sea, todo era precioso. Y
Con
luego ya,
GIF, sí.
sí, ya cuando entramos a segundo y que empezamos a ver las presentaciones de los otros, ahí sí fue como que el shock.
Sí, la neta sí.
Si así están sus presentaciones, ¿cómo van a estar sus políticas públicas?
Y también de
No,
que,
sus ensayos, Maga. O sea, siento que no han de saber ni cuándo usar una coma y un punto y coma.
y también de que las presentaciones de los maestros, ya ven las presentaciones de la profe Gaby o así, o las de el profe del segundo semestre, ¿cómo se llamaba? De Godina, porque estaba bien fea. Y así de que 200 diapos o así. O sea, también los maestros. Está
Sí, es
curioso.
cierto. Sí, la de Historia de México, esta Gaby, que su primera presentación literalmente era ella leyendo y como acordándose conforme iba leyendo. Y lo de que, no, esto no. Y que, bueno, está bien.
Oye,
Siento
y
que ya
creo que
conoces.
la materia es inglés, ¿no?
Sí, o sea que ella puede hablar en español, pero nosotros tenemos que exponer en inglés.
Oye, pero no, yo justo en español y las tareas también las he mandado en español.
¿Es en serio?
Sí, yo también. O sea,
Sí, pues ya
todo en
se me
español
olvidó
también.
por completo que era en...
Ay, lo voy a
Ah, no,
buscar.
pues.
Ay, pero no se puede quejar, o sea, no puede exigir.
Sí, yo también estoy así de que no sé cómo voy a calificar, no sé si siquiera vaya a abrir las tareas, o sea,
Literal.
lo dudo.
Yo también creo que nada más de que si lo entregaste ya, 10, 15 puntos. No creo que lo vaya a checar. Pero bueno.
Sí, a mí me cayó súper gorda también la de ética, la clase pasada. O sea que no se aparece y que nomás deja que los compañeros se expongan. Y luego empezó de que, bueno, ahora un ensayo y un PIA y no sé qué. Y yo de que, bro, yo creo que no hemos entregado ninguna evidencia formal como tal. O sea, nomás trabajos.
Sí.
Y en éticas ustedes sí llevan de que todas las mini tareitas que ha pedido, ya ven que pide como mini trabajitos y que los va a revisar todos hasta el final, o no lo han hecho.
Llevamos
¿De qué hablas?
3, ¿no? Es que al principio era de que a qué grupos perteneces, algo así. Y
Sí.
luego la segunda fue lo de Argentina, el trabajo que hicimos.
Ajá.
Y luego un tercero de quién rige la ética en México.
En México. Y también el de la moda, ¿no? Ese
Sí.
también.
El de la moda. Ah, ¿qué fue?
Fue un ensayo que creo que hizo nomás de que Diego y no me acuerdo qué otro. O sea, los dos Diegos y creo que Hugo. Bueno, porque no sé la verdad, pero yo no participé.
Ah, sí, pero ya me acordé.
Sí, creo que fue, lo entregamos un día antes de algo de tour, de lo de libertad.
Sí, ya me acuerdo. Ay, y del ensayo de libertad, o sea, cuando lo leí y cuando estaba haciendo el ensayo sí tenía muchas ideas, pero ayer que preguntó ya se me había olvidado todo y yo. Ay.
Sí, a veces siento que como que tú le espera un poco más, ¿saben? Y yo así como lo siento, mi cabeza no da para más.
Sí, cuando nos preguntan si estamos dormidos. Ay, no.
Ay, cosa. Oigan, ¿ustedes creen que regresemos el próximo semestre?
Yo no creía antes, pero ahorita yo creo que sí.
Sí. Bueno, ¿qué le ponemos a tour? Así como de mensajito. De que, hi doctor, we see you the other class. See you in another class.
Y
Sorry about your
terminamos la
internet.
siguiente clase, ahora sí.
Okay. ¿Qué día estoy? ¿Jueves o martes?
Martes.
O sea, nos vemos el jueves.
Claro que no es jueves.
21.
Nos vemos
Me
el martes.
perdí.
Hi doctor. We we see you on Thursday.
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Pues ya no, nos salimos.
Nos vemos.
Bueno, nos vemos la siguiente.
Adiós.
Sí.